items that they found in Lee Harvey Oswald's possession just before he went to the first lineup, because he was searched for the first time just before he went to the first lineup. So what items were found in his possession?
That's 5 live 38 rounds.
Okay.
Core ring.
Okay.
1387 cash.
Okay.
And a bus receipt.
And what was the significance of that bus receipt? It's a transfer. Actually, it was a bus transfer. There's a difference. What was it?
Well, he was headed to that station right Tippett.
Okay. And how far was that station away from where Tippett was?
2 blocks.
2 blocks. And the reason I want you to kind of asterisk that and mark that is because when it comes to at the end of this, when I tell you what I think really what's going on here, that's kind of an important piece of information. What? No. Okay, now, we're moving on to the first official lineup. Okay, so remember I told you yesterday in these lineups in 1963, they would bring in 4 or 5 individuals. They would face towards Hadley, which I mentioned yesterday. There would be bright lights in the face of the people that were in the lineup, and so they could not see the person that was trying to pick them out. Now when they do a lineup, they bring in, obviously, the person they arrested and then 3 other people. Okay, sometimes they're police officers, sometimes they're custodians, whoever, just they pick 4 to 5 people, okay, that these people that are identifying who they're supposed to identify wouldn't know any of them. So, Oswald was escorted in to the first lineup with 3 other individuals. So there's 4 standing there, and he was put in the number 2 position. So the first person they bring in would be 1. You know, if I was the lineup, second person would be 2, third person would be 3, last person would be 4. So he was in the 2 position. Okay, so there was a person on each side of him. Now, who was the person, do you think, they brought in to identify the person that shot J.D. Tippett? Helen Markham. So Helen Markham was brought into the room, and again, the men couldn't see her because the very bright lights were in their eyes. And as soon as Markham saw the 4 men standing there, she began to cry immediately. So as soon as the 4 men came in and stood and faced her, she began to cry. And she stated there was no doubt in her mind that the man in position number 2 was the man that shot Officer Tippett. No doubt in her mind. So they marched the 4 in. Oswald's in the 2nd position. Helen Markham takes a look at him. As soon as she takes a look at the 4 guys, she starts to cry, and she states that there is no doubt in her mind that the man in the number 2 position was the man who shot and killed Officer Tippett. Okay? So moving on, at 4:50 p.m. that day, we're still on the 22nd, police went out to Ruth Payne's house in Irving. What are they looking for? Oh. What would prove maybe that he didn't do it? If they found what at Ruth Payne's residence at 4:50 p.m., might it say that Oswald was innocent? So what are they looking for? What do they have? A rifle. Because if they go to Oswald's residence, Mrs. Oswald's residence in Irving, Mrs. Payne's house, and they find the rifle that he supposedly owns, then probably he didn't do it. You see what I'm saying? What's that? He said he didn't, but you got to remember it's him. Yeah. But they're trying to figure out, did he own a rifle, and was there a rifle at Ruth Payne's? Because that throws a little bit of a kink into things if they find a rifle. So at 4:50 p.m., police were sent out to Ruth Payne's house in Irving looking for a rifle that he might have owned. Okay? Because he said he didn't own one. They wanted to find out if he did. Well, when police got there, they asked Marina if Lee owned a rifle. And she said, yes, he does. It's actually in the garage wrapped up in a blanket. Okay? So again, police get to the Payne residence. They talk to Marina. They ask her if her husband owns a rifle, and she acknowledges that he does own a rifle. She knows that. And when they ask her where it was, she said, well, it's out. He keeps it out in the garage wrapped up in a blanket. Okay? Well, Mrs. Payne, who was a little bit into her rights, very nice lady, she wanted to go out there too. So Marina and Mrs. Payne went out with the police and saw the blanket laying on the floor of the garage. So the police go out there. Mrs. Payne feels like she needs to go out as well. It's her place, and Marina follows, so all 3 of them are sitting there. So the police officer bends down and picks up the blanket. And what happens? it goes limp right over his arm. In other words, there is no rifle in the blanket. When it's laying on the floor, it looked like there was a possibility there could be a rifle in it. As soon as he went to pick it up, it just went limp over his arm, and they knew that the rifle was indeed gone. Okay, so that's good evidence. Now, so what's the next thing the police are trying to do? They're going to try to connect the rifle that they have in their custody from the Texas School Book Depository with the missing rifle from Ruth Payne's garage. That's the next step, okay? So, at 5:45 p.m., Captain Fritz tells the police officers to bring both Marina and Mrs. Payne to police headquarters in downtown Dallas so they can question them. So that's the next step. So at 5:45 p.m., Captain Fritz tells police officers, bring Marina Oswald and bring Ruth Payne to police headquarters because we want to question them. Why would Fritz want to bring Marina and question her? What's he going to try to tie in? No, the rifle. He has the rifle that shot the president. He's going to see if Marina says, yeah, that's the rifle that Lee owned. That's obviously what he's trying to do. So he's especially interested to see if Marina could identify the rifle that was found in the depository. Okay, makes sense. Now, as police get ready to depart from the Payne residence, a neighbor stops by and talks to the police. And her name is Lenny Mae Randall. Okay? So as police get ready to depart from the Payne residence with Marina and Mrs. Payne, a neighbor stops by to talk to police. And the neighbor's name is Lenny Mae Randall. Okay? Now what Mrs. Randall tells police is that her brother actually had taken Lee Harvey Oswald to work that day. So Lenny Mae Randall comes down to police just before they're taken off to take Marina and Mrs. Payne to police headquarters, and she informs the police that her brother had taken Lee Oswald to work that day. Why would she tell them that? Because she went on to tell the police that she noticed that Oswald placed a package wrapped in brown paper in the back of her brother's car before her brother came out to get in it to give him a ride. And this will make sense when we talk about this procedure. But Lenny Mae Randall comes down and tells the police, hey, my brother gave Lee Oswald a ride to work this morning. Not only that, I noticed when Lee got into the car, which he did before her brother did, that he placed a brown paper, or excuse me, a package wrapped in brown paper in the back seat. And she thought the package was about 2 feet long, is what she told police. What could that have possibly been? The rifle. Now, is there many rifles this long? What do rifles tend to do? Come apart. Okay, and that's a little bit, we'll talk about the controversy on that before. There's some error on how long the rifle was from different perspectives, but we'll talk about that. But anyway, Lenny Mae Randall comes down, she says to the police, hey, I've got some information for you. Actually, my brother gave Lee Oswald a ride to work this morning, the day of the assassination, and I noticed that he got into the car, and when he got into the car, he put a package wrapped in brown paper in the back seat before he got in and before my brother got in. And when they asked her how long the package was, she said about 2 feet. But I mean, she wasn't standing right there, right? Now, back at police headquarters, Oswald's marched out for a second lineup. Okay, they're bringing him out for a second lineup. And who do you think were looking at this lineup? It was all the other eyewitnesses that were in the vicinity with Mrs. Markham at that time. Remember I said there were several witnesses? Okay, so Oswald is again marched out for the second lineup. He's identified by the eyewitnesses without any doubt. Every one of them pointed him out in the lineup as the killer of Officer Tippit. Every single witness that was brought into the second lineup said, that's the guy that shot Officer Tippit. Okay, so do you think the Dallas police are pretty confident they at least have the guy that shot Tippett? Yeah, and I think they have a cinched case on that at this point, okay? But we're still not where we want to be. Well, at 7:15 p.m. that evening, Marina Oswald arrives at police headquarters. Okay, she arrives at police headquarters from Mrs. Payne's house, with Mrs. Payne. Now, where is all of the action in that building? On the 3rd floor. And Captain Fritz didn't want to have to march Marina all the way through that mess to one of the interrogation rooms. So he actually left her on the ground floor and brought what? The rifle to her, okay, to identify. So Captain Fritz did not want to march Marina through the 3rd floor mob of reporters, so he decided to have the rifle brought to her, and they brought it down from the 3rd floor. But as they brought it down, did they march it down the 3rd floor and hold it up? Yeah, because the media was wanting to get involved in this. They had to kind of feed the media a little bit. So the rifle was actually marched down. J.C. Day, remember that name? He marched the rifle down, all the way down the 3rd floor, and then took it down to where Marina Oswald was on the ground level, so the media could at least see the rifle. And you see pictures, have you seen pictures of that in our videos, have you? Where J.C. Day's moving it down?
Don't you have a picture on your wall of that?
Yeah, I probably do. Yeah, right here.
Day's the one that brought it down to her, not.
Right, he brought it down to Fritz, who then gave it to her.
Oh.
But J.C.
okay.
did. But here he is, thank you, Taryn. There's a picture of where his signature is, where you can see him walking down at this point with the rifle over his head, down the 3rd floor, so they could see him. Okay? Well, like Shana mentioned, J.C. Day gave it to Fritz. He showed it to Marina, but she didn't know much about guns, so she couldn't for sure say, yeah, that's the one he owned. That's not unusual. I have guns. If you brought my wife in here and went and got one of my too many guns, and you brought in and said, does your husband own this exact gun? She'd say, well, I don't know, he owns so damn many of them, I couldn't tell you. Or I don't know guns. My wife doesn't know guns. She wouldn't know one gun from another, wouldn't know if it was mine. So it wasn't unusual if Marina didn't know if that was her husband's gun, because she never, she didn't know much about guns, she never used it. She knew he had it, okay? Well, so Captain Fritz is a little frustrated, so he leaves the room, and guess who walks in to talk to Marina? Crazy Marguerite Oswald. Lee Harvey Oswald's mother, all of a sudden appears at the police headquarters, and she walks in as Fritz walks out and starts talking to Marina. Now, do anybody know where Marguerite Oswald lived at the time? She didn't live in Dallas. She lived in Fort Worth. So how did she get from Fort Worth to Dallas because she has no vehicle? Anybody have a good guess? Well, what she did is this. Great story. When she hears about the assassination and her son's name being mentioned as the assassin, she called the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, which is a newspaper in Fort Worth. She calls him up. Okay, gets on the phone, calls him up. The man that answers the phone is this fellow right here, and you probably might recognize him, Bob Schieffer, who worked for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. He worked for him. He's a very famous journalist now. If you go up and look at that picture, I almost guarantee you'll say, I've seen that guy on TV. But this time it was 1963. So the man that answers the telephone was a reporter by the name of Bob Schieffer. Well, she says to Schieffer, she said, hey, can someone from the newspaper building come down here and get me and drive me to Dallas Police Headquarters? And Schieffer doesn't know who she is. She's just some lady that calls on the phone. Hey, listen, anybody down there want to give me a ride to Dallas Police Headquarters? And Schieffer says to Mrs. Oswald, quote, lady, we're not a taxi service here, and besides, the president's been shot. He doesn't know who she is. She states, yes, I heard that on the radio, and my son is the one they arrested. Okay, so picture that in your mind. Schieffer answers the phone, he has no idea who this lady is. She says on the phone, hey, can somebody down there pick me up and give me a ride to Dallas Police Headquarters? Schieffer goes, hey lady, we don't run a taxi service here. Besides that, the president's been shot. In other words, we're kind of busy. And she goes, yeah, I heard that on the radio. and my son's the one they arrested. Well, suddenly Schieffer wakes up, he jots down her address, he takes another reporter, a guy by the name of Bill Foster, and they go get Mrs. Oswald, and they have no problem taking her to Dallas Police Headquarters. Why? What's that? Sure, they can get information from her on the way if she likes them because they gave her a ride. They might have exclusive, I mean, this is the business they're in. Well, here's Bob Schieffer right here. Again, I have a signature, that's a new one I got. And if you look at him, he's still active today on occasion. Very good, respected reporter, not as good as Walter Cronkite, but right in the business. Okay, right in the same area. So he ends up being the one that gives Marguerite a ride to Dallas Police Headquarters. Guess who else shows up at Dallas Police Headquarters about the same time as his mother? Robert Oswald. Very good. Well, you saw some of this, I think, on Parkland when we watched that. Remember, Marguerite takes Robert aside, tells him to be careful, don't say anything, the room's bugged. I don't know if you picked that up on the movie. She also tells Robert that Lee's working for the CIA, and whatever he did, he was told to do. That, which, remember, if you watch the video, it kind of annoyed Robert. He thought his mother was out of her mind, which she kind of was. Remember, she made the comment she thought he should be buried in Arlington for the great service he did the country. I mean, that was just how she was acting, and Robert was very annoyed by that. And that whole thing went on that you watched in Parkland as we're talking about in history. So now you've got a room full of Marina, Mrs. Oswald, Robert Oswald, and they're all just shook up, obviously, and Mrs. Oswald's putting on the mother's putting on quite a show. Okay, I think she's going to make some money off the deal. If you caught that part, you know, they're going to sell all this. Well, about that same time at 7:40, a third lineup occurs. And unlike the first two, this lineup will have a witness to the Kennedy assassination, trying to point Oswald out. Who's the only, test your memory, who's the only witness they have to the Kennedy assassination? What? Anybody remember Howard? Brennan. Remember way back when we talked about this before Christmas, he actually said he saw the rifle sticking out of the, and it was his description that led to the 8 all-points bulletin. Well, Howard Brennan was brought in. For the first time at 7:40 p.m. that night, on the third lineup, they now have a witness to the Kennedy assassination, hoping Howard Brennan can say, yeah, that's the guy I saw on the 6th floor. Brennan tells police he's not sure. Why? Even if he was 100% sure, why did he tell him he was not sure? What do you think? What's that? No, not so much that. I think he got a good look at him. What? Why did he say did not? Was
like all on him.
Kind of. He was scared. He didn't know what was going on. He feared for his life and his family's life. He thought there might be more than one shooter, and he was afraid of his safety and his family's safety if he pointed Oswald out. Think about that. If Oswald's working with other people, and they found out that Howard Brennan's the one that fingered Oswald in the lineup, they might go after him and his family. So he was, I think he knew, I think he could have done that, but the point was he was so scared for his family and his own life.
Did you say that later?
Yes, but not at the time. That's good. Yeah, he did later. But he was afraid. Okay? Well, that didn't work out so good with him, so they still really don't have Oswald on anything concerning the president. I think they think they got a locked case on the Tippit murder, no question. So what does Fritz need badly? A confession. So at 7:55 p.m., they take Oswald back into Fritz's office, and Fritz starts to interrogate him again. 7:55. This is all the same day. All this has happened. Okay? So at 7:55, Oswald goes back to Fritz's office, and he's going to interrogate him some more. What do you think the first question is he asks him? Think about what we kind of talked about, what Fritz has had people do. Do you keep a rifle in Mrs. Payne's garage? First question Fritz asked him at this point. Do you keep a rifle in Mrs. Payne's garage? His answer, no, I don't own a rifle. Okay, so the first question he's asked is, do you keep a rifle in Mrs. Payne's garage? And the answer is, no, I don't own a rifle. Well, they told Oswald that the police at the house, that the people, Mrs. Payne and his wife, said he kept a rifle wrapped in a blanket in the garage. So they said, well, Lee, we talked to Marina and Mrs. Payne, and they said you did have a rifle, and you kept it wrapped in a blanket in the garage. And Oswald's response is, that's not true. Fritz is getting a little frustrated. So he finally just says to Oswald, Lee, you know you killed the president, and this is a very serious charge. Oswald's response, nope, I haven't killed the president. And he's just too calm, because he's a really, when we find out about him, he's a very reactatory person. For him to be this calm is just a little weird. So again, I'll kind of back up. He's asked, do you keep a rifle in Mrs. Payne's garage? No, I don't own a rifle. Well, Lee, your wife and Mrs. Payne said you did own a rifle and you had it wrapped up in a blanket in the garage. That's not true. Lee, you know you killed the president and this is a very serious charge. No, I haven't killed the president. Fritz then tells Oswald that the president was dead. Because I don't know if he knew he was or not, if you think about it, right? He's been running for his life, captured in the theater. Does he know that? So Fritz decides he's going to make a point to tell Oswald, well, you know the president's dead. You know what Oswald's cold response was? And this isn't a quote. He basically stated to Fritz, oh, don't worry about it. They'll forget about him. We'll have a new president in a few days. That was his comment to that. Not that direct quote, but that's basically what he said. When he was told about the death of President Kennedy, he said, well, they'll forget about him and we'll have a new president in a few days. He didn't seem too concerned about it. Okay, the next person that was brought in to be interrogated by Fritz was Buell Wesley Frazier. Buell Wesley Frazier. Here's Buell. I got several pictures of Buell Wesley Frazier. This might be the best one right here. You can see him coming into police headquarters as a young man. He was just 19 years old. And this is a very cool signature too, Randy. A very long day, Buell Wesley Frazier. But I have other pictures of him you can see up here too. But that's kind of a key one right there. Okay? Anyway, so Buell Wesley Frazier's brought in. Who is he? Lenny Mae Randall's brother. The guy that gave him a ride to the depository that day. Now this wasn't unusual. I want to explain the story and I think I've already done that. But I'll rephrase it. Okay, they were separated. Lee Harvey Oswald and his wife. But they had 2 daughters. They weren't divorced. Marina lived with the 2 girls with Mrs. Payne and her kids. Lee Harvey Oswald lived in North Beckley Street. But every Friday, since he worked at the depository, Buell Frazier, who just lived a couple of doors down from Mrs. Payne, would give Lee Harvey Oswald a ride back to Irving on Friday, drop him off. He would spend the weekend with his family, and then he would drive back with Buell Frazier to work on Monday. So this wasn't a one-time thing. This happened weekly. Now, this was unusual because Lee Harvey Oswald asked him for a ride on Thursday, the 21st. And Frazier said, well, Lee, why are you coming home Thursday rather than your normal Friday? This is when I think I told you that yesterday, he said that Marina had made him some curtains for his boarding room on Beckley, and he was going to the Payne residence to get curtain rods so he could hang them up when he got back. That was his explanation to Frazier. Okay? Well, if you continue the story, and we're kind of at that time, Mrs. Payne came home that Thursday and she was quite surprised that Lee was there. Lee and Marina were sitting on the lawn playing with the children. Marina felt very awkward that Lee had arrived unannounced because she just didn't think that was right. She kind of had permission for him to come there on Fridays and spend the weekend, but this was a day early. Now this is some interesting information here. That evening of the 21st, Mrs. Payne went to her garage to look for some paint because she wanted to decorate some wooden blocks for her children. And she noticed the light was on when she went in there. And she assumed that Lee had been in the garage and forgot to turn off the light. She didn't get an opportunity to ask Oswald about it or didn't think too much about it because he was already in bed when she got back from getting the paint. And the next morning, Lee Harvey Oswald left before Mrs. Payne was up. So, you know, she didn't think of anything, but you think about what happened. She goes that night, that Thursday night, into the garage to get some paint, to paint some wooden blocks for her children, and she notices the light is on. Well, she's assuming that Lee Harvey Oswald was in there getting some and forgot to turn the light on. But she didn't ask him about it that night because he was already in bed, and she didn't ask him about it the next morning because he had already left. What was he doing in the garage that night? probably getting that rifle and wrapping it up in that brown paper is the guess people are thinking, okay? Now, according to Mrs. Payne, and again, you don't have to really write all this stuff down, but it's kind of important you understand it. Oswald was real quiet that night at dinner, and he went to bed a lot earlier than usual, which was kind of weird for him. Now, this is kind of important that you understand at least. Mrs. Payne said later that he left a majority of his money, $170, and his wedding ring in a cup on the dresser, okay? He also left a note for Marina to get some new shoes for Junie, one of the girls, okay? So, that seemed a little odd that he would leave a majority of his money. He left $170, which he just wouldn't, and that's a lot of money at that time, and his wedding ring, which he never took off. In Russia, when you had your wedding ring and you married, you didn't take that off. Took it off, put it in a cup, and left her a note to buy some shoes, which was unusual that he would spend the money to buy shoes, which tells people that maybe he wasn't planning on what? Returning. Okay, and we'll talk about that later, because he actually left her a note, a different note we'll talk about. Okay, now, I just want you to kind of listen to this interview. This is Buell Frazier interviewing with Captain Fritz. Okay? And this is what Buell Frazier told Captain Fritz, and this is what Buell Frazier is going to tell you on the phone next week when we get together. Okay? On Friday morning, that's why I don't need to really write down. On Friday morning, the 22nd, Oswald actually overslept that morning. And he dressed really quickly, and he hurried down the street towards Frazier's home, and he knocked on the door at 7:10 a.m., which was late. Okay? And this was the quote that Frazier made about that. He said, "And when I came out to get into the car, I glanced over and saw a package in the back seat. I said, 'What's that?' And he said, 'You remember, that's the curtain rods I was going to bring in.'" And according to Frazier, the package had fit between the armpit of Oswald and his cupped hand as they walked into the depository that morning. So would that match Lenny Mae Randall's description of about 2 feet? Okay? Okay, so that's Frazier's story to the police. Okay, so let's kind of sum this up right now. At 10:15 that night, after this whole day, Captain Fritz still has little or no solid evidence against Oswald for what? The murder of Kennedy. Okay, I'll give you some examples. This is what he does not have. Does he have any evidence tying Oswald to the rifle found on the 6th floor? No. Does he have any proof that the rifle actually belonged to Oswald? No. Does he have any eyewitnesses putting Oswald on the 6th floor of the depository at the time of the shooting? No, because Brennan said he wasn't sure. And does he have a very non-cooperative suspect? Yes. It's the only yes to that, but I'll repeat that. So, at 10:15 p.m., Captain Fritz really has nothing against Oswald in the assassination of the president. He's got no evidence tying him to the rifle that they found on the 6th floor. He's got no proof that that rifle belonged to Oswald. He's got no eyewitness that puts Oswald on the 6th floor during the time of the shooting. And he's got a very non-cooperative suspect. Now, can they hold him on bail?
Yeah.
Why? For the murder of Tippett. So they got some break there. They certainly can hold him without bail on the J.D. Tippett murder. And what they're hoping to do is get enough evidence or a confession that they can charge him with the murder of Kennedy before the end of the day. That's their goal. But it is 10:15 p.m. and they got nothing. And they're going to hold him only on the murder of Tippett. They want to try to get it. So Fritz is no doubt in Fritz's mind that he's got the guy that killed Tippett and he's got the guy that killed Kennedy. However, what's he want? A confession. So Fritz has got to take a chance. It's getting late. It's 11:26 p.m. So Fritz is going to gamble. So what does he do at 11:26 p.m. even though he doesn't have any evidence?
Did he charge him?
They charge him with the murder of President Kennedy. Even though he's just taking a chance, hoping he can get something. But he can't wait any longer. They wanted to charge him with Kennedy's murder. They tried all day to get the guy to break. He didn't do it. Tried all day to try to get some evidence to tie him to the rifle. Things are looking bad. But Fritz says, you know what? I'm taking a shot. So at 11:26 p.m., Lee Harvey Oswald was officially charged with the murder of John F. Kennedy. Okay? Hang tight with that. I forgot something I wanted to give you. I think you might like. Forgot it in my office.